You planted tomatoes. Again, you babied them for 3 months, watched them like a hawk, dealt with hornworms the size of your thumb, and got maybe 30 tomatoes before the plant died. There's a plant that produces 200 pounds of food per plant, stores for 6 months without refrigeration, grows in terrible soil, laughs at frost, and never needs replanting, ever. So why is nobody talking about it? Stick around, because this changes everything. The plant is called tree collards. And before you click away thinking this is about some boring kale relative, hold on. This isn't your grocery store collards. This is a perennial vegetable that acts more like a fruit tree than a leafy green. It grows 8 to 12 feet tall, produces edible leaves year-round, and once you plant it, it keeps going for 10, 20, sometimes 30 years. You read that right, 3 decades from one planting. Now I know what you're thinking. If this plant is so amazing, why haven't you heard of it? Great question. The answer is a mix of bad marketing, agricultural amnesia, and the fact that seed companies can't make money off a plant you never have to buy again. Tree collards don't produce viable seeds in most climates. That means once you have a plant, you can make infinite free plants forever. Seed companies hate this. So they push tomatoes and peppers and beans, things you have to buy seeds for every single year. But let's get into why tree collards absolutely demolish tomatoes in almost every category that matters for a home gardener. First, the production numbers. A healthy tomato plant, if you're doing everything right, might give you 20 to 40 pounds of tomatoes in a season. That's optimistic. Most people get less. A mature tree collard plant produces 80 to 200 pounds of edible leaves per year. Per year, not per season. Year-round. You're harvesting in January. You're harvesting in July. You're harvesting whenever you want food. And here's the kicker. Those leaves store. You can harvest a bunch, blanch them for 2 minutes, freeze them, and they last 6 months easily. Or you dehydrate them and they last even longer. Or you ferment them like kimchi. Try doing that with a tomato without serious processing. Tomatoes last, what? 2 weeks if you're lucky. Tree collard leaves are flexible. You can store them multiple ways depending on what you need. The plant itself is almost stupidly easy to grow. Rich soil, consistent watering, support structures, pruning, and constant vigilance against pests and diseases. They're divas. Tree collards? They'll grow in partial shade. They don't care if your soil is kind of terrible. They're drought tolerant once established. They don't need staking. They rarely get pests because the leaves are tough and not particularly attractive to insects. And diseases. Almost never an issue. Here's something most gardening guides won't tell you. Tomatoes are annuals for a reason. They're pushing all their energy into fruit production in a short window. That's stressful for the plant. They burn out. They're programmed to die. Tree collards are perennials. They're in it for the long haul. They grow slowly and steadily. They build strong root systems. They don't panic and try to reproduce before winter. They just keep growing. Let's talk about climate for a second. Tomatoes are warm season crops. They die when frost hits. You've got maybe a 4 to 6 month window in most climates where tomatoes are even possible. Tree collards are cold hardy down to about 20 degrees Fahrenheit, some varieties lower. They slow down in extreme cold, but they don't die. When it warms up, they start growing again. They literally never stop producing. I'm in a climate with actual winters, and my tree collards keep producing through November. Sometimes December if it's a mild year. They start back up in March. That's useful food during the shoulder seasons when almost nothing else is growing. In warmer zones, zones 8 through 10, you're harvesting every single month. That's a game changer for food security. If they're so great, why don't commercial farms grow them? Because commercial agriculture doesn't care about the same things you do. They need crops that can be machine harvested, shipped thousands of miles, and sit on a shelf for weeks. Tree collards don't fit that model. You harvest leaves individually. They're best fresh or preserved at home. They don't ship well, because the leaves are large and delicate. Commercial farms can't make money on them. But you're not a commercial farm. You're a person who wants food in your backyard. Different game entirely. Let me paint a picture of what growing tree collards actually looks like. You get a cutting from someone, or you buy a small plant online. They're not expensive, usually $10 to $20. You stick it in the ground. You water it regularly for the first few weeks until it establishes roots. Then you basically ignore it, except for occasional watering during dry spells. That's it. That's the maintenance. The plant grows, then faster. In the first year, you might get a few harvests. Not much. The plant is building its root system and structure. Year 2, production ramps up significantly. Year 3, you've got a tree-sized plant producing massive amounts of leaves. And it keeps going. I've talked to people with tree collards that are over 20 years old, still producing like crazy. You harvest by taking the lower leaves, the older ones. The plant keeps producing new growth at the top. You never take more than about a third of the leaves at once. The plant needs photosynthesis to keep growing, but a third of the leaves from a mature plant is still pounds and pounds of food. You can harvest weekly if you want. The plant doesn't care. The leaves themselves are nutritious in a way that makes tomatoes look like junk food. We're talking massive amounts of vitamins A, C, and K, calcium, iron, fiber, antioxidants. This is superfood territory. 1 cup of cooked collard greens has more calcium than a cup of milk and more vitamin C than an orange. Tomatoes are fine, but they're mostly water and a bit of vitamin C. The nutritional density isn't even close. And the taste? This is subjective. But hear me out. Tomatoes are acidic and sweet, great for certain things. Tree collard leaves are earthy, slightly sweet, with a cabbage-like quality. You cook them. You don't eat them raw, though you could if you wanted to be miserable. Sauté them with garlic and olive oil. Add them to soups. Make them into a gratin. Use them as wraps. They're versatile in ways tomatoes aren't. Here's a comparison nobody makes. Think about fruit trees. You plant an apple tree, you wait a few years, then you get apples every year for decades. That's the model everyone accepts for fruit. But for some reason, we've decided vegetables have to be annuals that you replant every spring. That's insane. Tree collards are the vegetable equivalent of an apple tree. You plant once, you harvest for years. The space efficiency is another factor. A tomato plant takes up 4 to 6 square feet of garden space for one season. A tree collard takes up maybe 6 to 9 square feet, but it's producing for 20 years. The math isn't even close. Over the lifetime of one tree collard, you'd have to plant tomatoes 20 times in that same space. The amount of work, soil amendments, water, and money you save is staggering. Let's talk propagation, because this is where it gets fun. You want more tree collard plants? You cut a branch. Seriously. You take a cutting about 8 to 12 inches long. Strip the lower leaves, stick it in moist soil or even water, and it grows roots. In a few weeks, you've got a new plant. One plant becomes 2, becomes 4, becomes 8. You can fill your entire garden with tree collards for free. Try doing that with tomato seeds? Oh wait, you can, but you're still replanting every year. Some people take cuttings in the fall, root them indoors over winter, and plant them out in spring. Others just stick cuttings directly in the ground in early spring. Both methods work. The plant wants to live. It's almost hard to kill once it's established. I've seen people accidentally propagate tree collards by leaving a cut branch on the ground and it rooting itself. Now, let's address potential downsides because nothing is perfect. Tree collards get big. If you've got a tiny garden, a 10-foot tall plant might not work, but you can coppice them, which means cutting them back to a few feet tall. They grow back from the cut. You control the size. It's not a deal breaker, just something to manage. They also don't love extreme heat. In zones 9 and 10, you might need to give them afternoon shade in summer. The leaves can get bitter if the plant is stressed by heat. Again, manageable. Plant them where they get morning sun and afternoon shade. Problem solved. And some people don't like the taste. Fair enough. Not everyone likes cooked greens. Cabbage, kale, broccoli, you'll probably like tree collards. The sheer volume of food they produce makes them worth growing. You can always give excess to neighbors or chickens. Chickens go absolutely crazy for collard leaves. Here's where tree collards really shine in a practical sense. Food security. We're living in weird times. Supply chains are fragile. Food prices are volatile. Having a plant in your backyard that produces food year-round, regardless of what's happening at the grocery store, that's valuable. That's insurance. You can't eat insurance premiums, but you can eat tree collards. And it's not just about emergencies. It's about reducing your dependence on a food system that ships tomatoes 2,000 miles, so you can eat them in February. Those tomatoes taste like wet cardboard because they were picked green and gassed with ethylene to turn red. Your tree collards, picked fresh from your garden in February in a mild climate, taste like actual food. There's no comparison. Let me give you a real-world scenario. You plant 3 tree-collard plants. In year 3, each plant is producing around 100 pounds of leaves per year. That's 300 pounds total. A family of 4 eats maybe 2 to 3 pounds of cooked greens per week if you're eating healthy. That's 100 to 150 pounds per year. You've just covered your family's leafy green needs with 3 plants that require almost no maintenance. What are you doing with the other 150 pounds? Freezing it, giving it away, feeding chickens. Whatever you want. You've got abundance. Compare that to tomatoes. You plant 10 tomato plants, which is a lot. You get maybe 200 to 300 pounds of tomatoes total if you have a great year. You use them for 3 months, then they're done. You're back to buying tomatoes at the store. The tree collards are still going, still producing, still giving you food. The other advantage is the learning curve. Tomatoes are actually kind of hard to grow well. You need to know about pruning suckers, determinate versus indeterminate varieties, blossom end rot, calcium deficiencies, proper watering schedules. There's a lot to learn. Tree collards are almost foolproof. Water them. Don't let them dry out completely. Harvest leaves. That's pretty much it. A complete beginner can succeed with tree collards in a way they might struggle with tomatoes. There's also something to be said for the aesthetics. A mature tree collard is actually a beautiful plant. It's got a tree-like structure with a thick woody stem and a canopy of large blue-green leaves. It's architectural. It adds vertical interest to a garden. Tomato plants, let's be honest, look like a mess by August. Some leaves are yellow, there's stakes and cages everywhere. Tree collards maintain their shape and look good year-round. Now let's talk varieties. Because there are a few, which is what most people grow. It's cold, hardy, and productive. There's also a purple variety that's even more cold, hardy, and has a slightly different flavor. Some people prefer it. There are a few other rare varieties floating around in seed saver networks. But those 2 are what you'll find most easily. One thing to note is that tree collards are part of an informal network of growers who share cuttings. There's no big commercial industry around them. You usually get cuttings from a friend, a local plant swap, or a small online seller. You're participating in a tradition of plant sharing that goes back centuries. It's the opposite of buying a packet of hybrid seeds from a corporation. The history of tree collards is actually pretty interesting. They're old, really old. They've been grown in Europe, particularly in Britain and Portugal, for hundreds of years. They were brought to North America by colonists and grown in homesteads and cottage gardens. But when industrial agriculture took over in the 20th century, tree collards fell out of favor. They don't fit the industrial model. So they survived in small pockets, kept alive by gardeners who recognized their value. There's been a resurgence in the last 10 to 15 years as people have rediscovered them. The permaculture movement has been big on tree collards because they fit the permaculture principle of perennial food production. Homesteaders love them. Anyone interested in food security and low-maintenance gardening is catching on. And here's the thing. This information isn't hidden. It's not a secret. But it's also not widely promoted because there's no profit in it. Seed companies make money selling seeds every year. Garden centers make money selling tomato transplants every spring. There's an entire industry built around annual vegetables. Tree collards disrupt that model. So you don't see them in gardening magazines or big box stores. You have to seek them out, but once you know, you can't unknow it. Once you understand that you can have a plant producing food for 20 years from a single planting, it changes how you think about gardening. Why would you spend every spring planting tomatoes when you could have perennial vegetables doing the work for you? Let me address one more thing. Some people worry that focusing on tree collards means giving up tomatoes. That's not what I'm saying. Grow tomatoes. If you love tomatoes. I grow tomatoes. They're delicious fresh. You can't replace a fresh tomato sandwich in August. But don't make tomatoes the foundation of your garden. Make them a bonus crop. Build your garden around perennials, like tree collards that produce reliable food year after year. Then add annuals like tomatoes for variety and fun. The goal is resilience. A garden full of annuals is fragile. One bad year and you get nothing. A garden with perennials is stable. The tree collards produce no matter what. The fruit trees produce no matter what. The asparagus and rhubarb come back every year. You've got a foundation. Then the annuals are extra. This is what our great-grandparents understood. They had kitchen gardens with perennials and a few annuals. They weren't replanting everything every year. They couldn't afford the time or money. They planted things once and let them produce. We've somehow lost that knowledge in 2 generations. We've been sold the idea that gardening means buying seeds and transplants every spring. It doesn't have to be that way. Tree collards are proof that there's a better model. A model where you work with perennial plants that give back year after year, where you build soil and ecosystems instead of depleting them, where you save money and time while producing more food. It's not complicated. It's actually simpler than what most people are doing. So here's what you do. Find a tree collard cutting. They're out there. Check online. Check local plant groups. Ask around. Get a cutting. Plant it. Water it. Wait. In 2 years, you'll have more food than you know what to do with from a plant that requires almost no effort. And you'll wonder why anyone told you tomatoes were the king of the garden. Thanks for watching. If you want more videos about perennial vegetables and low-maintenance gardening that actually works, hit subscribe. More coming soon.